Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Karen Goodenough. I'm Executive Director at the National Association of Social Workers Minnesota Chapter, NASW Minnesota, and thrilled to have so many of you joining us today, or maybe watching the recording later of this session on cover letters and resumes. So last year we did a session on what are you worth, job search and negotiation for social workers. And it was a really fantastic session. I had a panel of folks. We looked at some of the research and how to negotiate and that sort of thing. That session is on our YouTube channel. So I encourage you after today's session to check that one out as well. I'm trying not to replicate what I talked about there. So you can find a bunch of additional content in that one that I think might be helpful to you in your job search process. That, as I said, is on our YouTube channel. So just look for NASW Minnesota on YouTube. Now, just a note for those who are with me today, you will only show up in the recording of today's session if you unmute yourself to speak. The recording will be put on our YouTube channel. So just a note on that. But if you decide to unmute yourself and speak, then your face will show up. Otherwise, you can turn on your camera so I can see you and talk to you, and you won't show up in there. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. Our goal today is really to provide you with some concrete tools to freshen up your cover letters and your resumes so you can hopefully join that team that you have your eyes on, or maybe be ready for something that you don't even know is coming. All right. Now we're going to cover today a little bit about the social work job outlook, kind of what kind of jobs are we looking for, how many jobs are out there, some quick facts about the job search process. And I'm going to spend the bulk of our time on resume tips and cover letter tips, and then I will share some resources and some samples. Since this is just a 1-hour session, we can't cover everything out there under the sun, but I do want to give you a bunch of resources that you can check out if you want to do a little more work after today's session. So to give me a sense of who's in the room with me here today, I'd love to get a sense of what you're up to in your job search process. So I'm wondering if you could either, if your camera's on, you can physically raise your hand. And if your camera's not on, you could go ahead and just drop into the chat or do that little raise hand function and answer some questions for me. So the first one is, how many of you have changed jobs in the last 2 years? Put those hands up. Give me a sense. How many of you have changed jobs or received a new job? Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, couple hands up. And how many of you are actively looking for a new job? Maybe some of those same people, maybe some different. Okay, maybe, kind of, sort of. So a couple of you, it looks like, are like, maybe on the fence there. So maybe you'll learn some things today to help you prepare for what might be to come. I'd love to hear in the chat, what's something that you're looking for in your next employer? That doesn't mean you have to be job searching, so you're not putting yourself out there at all, but I'd love to just get some ideas. Like the next time you work for someone, what are you looking for in the kind of organization, in the way they behave, maybe in their reputation, maybe the kind of work environment you want? Maybe you want to go all virtual. All right, so someone's saying flexible schedule, good benefits, flexibilities, options for remote work. Nobody said I can wear yoga pants and slippers every day, but maybe that's on your list. You're just not putting it out there. Yeah, love that. Good work environment. As part of the gig economy, I look for jobs that are a good fit with my education and skills. I love it. So piecing some things together, that gig economy, like trying to find some different things that are interesting to you along the way. Openness, good structure. All right, cool. So you might have some ideas of what you're looking for, and organizations absolutely have kind of some of these things they're kind of clear about. They have a reputation out in the world. There might be people you can talk to figure out, like, where are there opportunities, as someone's saying, opportunities for advancement, more responsibility, a place that I can grow into. So you might want to do some of that research ahead of time so you have a really good sense of what you're looking for specifically, instead of just, I think part of the job search process for most of us is like, it's just overwhelming. There's so many things out there. So part of it is when I sit down with people and they're like, I'm looking for a job, I'm like, okay, like what? Which skills do you want to use? What kind of populations do you want to work with? What geographic area do you want to be in? And as you answer those questions, you kind of hone in on what you're looking for. And then what we want to spend our time today on is really making you the best candidates you can be, specifically in those documents that you are submitting to those organizations. So I love this little graphic. So ask yourself if what you're doing today is getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow. So I think this is a really good question to ask ourselves. If you're one of those folks who raised your hands that it's time to look for something new, or you're thinking there might be something new out there soon, I'm really glad that you're here. And I also think that there's things you can be doing today to prepare you for that may be ahead. And some of that is even putting out into the universe that you might be open to options. And sometimes people don't even think about that, but often the best jobs come from just putting the word out there, kind of getting people thinking about you and thinking that you might be a fit for something that might come along at some point. So it's like pre-job search. Okay. Start getting your name and your energy out into the world. And then I think that, it's good to acknowledge this may or may not include actually changing jobs right now for you. But regardless of that, updating your cover letter and your resumes are really important. Whether or not you're searching for a new job, having a fresh, updated cover letter and resume on your desktop ready to go is a great idea so that you can pounce on that dream opportunity when it arises. I cannot tell you how many times I talk to people who saw something come across their desk, but they're so busy at that moment and they didn't feel like they could get their materials ready in time. And I want you to be ready to have your stuff at your fingertips. So when you're ready, maybe it's just a little freshening up, and we're going to talk today about how to work on your cover letter so it fits that particular role, but then you're ready. Okay. So let's talk about some of the data on our career statistics for social workers currently. Only about 21% of college graduates use most or all of their education in their work or career. And I think that's an interesting stat because so often when we look at job descriptions, we're thinking, I need to use all of my skills and experiences and things for this next job. And the reality is only a portion of your skills and experience, particularly at your education, are things that you're actually going to be using actively. So I think don't limit yourself based on what those, what you think are kind of this full set of skills and experiences you have, and you don't necessarily get the opportunity always to use them all in that work setting. In the same way, some of us, women in particular, statistically, will limit ourselves to what we apply to based on having all of the requirements met for that job. And I want you to think about when you look at a job, and we talk about this more in that session from last year that I was talking about that's on YouTube, but applying to the things where you meet maybe a quarter or so of the criteria for that particular job, and not limiting yourself to, okay, I have to check off every single box on here in order to even apply. All right. Because you don't know who the other applicants are. And so often organizations are making choices. They're like, well, I have this person, they're really great in these. I have this person that's great in these, and they're making some choices about that. So again, don't take yourself out of the running before you're even in it. I think some of these other statistics are really interesting too about kind of why we leave jobs. 39% of people are considering changes in career because of better salaries. We know that the salaries are absolutely something. Oh, Mary, thank you so much. Am I not sharing my slides? Wow. I love it. Thanks, guys. Haha. Let's try that again. Thanks, Mary. What did I have up before that? All right, no wonder y'all don't know what I'm talking about here. I talked about joining our team. Here's what we're going to cover in today's session. Who's searching? Ask yourself about what you need to get to where you want to be. And then we're on these statistics. Are we good now? Yeah, cool. All right, thanks. Thanks, Mary. I love that. Thanks for keeping me in line. All right, so we're talking about people changing roles because of better salaries. We know that is true, absolutely. And it's a bummer in so many fields that it necessitates picking up and leaving a job in order to get paid what you're worth somewhere else. And I think that salary and negotiation work that we talked about in that other session, I think that's really valid at this point, that maybe negotiating in the place that you're currently working, if that's some place that you want to potentially stay, or making sure you're ready to negotiate at the next space that you're going to. Only about 14% of the current workforce believes that they have a great job that they would not like to change. 70% are actively looking for a change in career. I think those are fascinating stats. The reality is most of us are kind of open to opportunities if something were to come along for us, okay? There's also the reality that many of us are going to continue to change jobs more often than historically groups of people did, and that is continuing to be true for us as well. In social work, however, we know that there's some good news for us, that the number of social work jobs are continuing to grow, that our field is intending to grow about 9% between 2021 and 2031. That's almost double the average of all other occupations, which are looking at about a 5% growth rate. Mental health care and mental health needs are growing, in addition to just sort of the general societal understanding that social workers can help address these needs. And we can see that in the growth in our field. All right, so we're talking about, we've got over 700,000 social workers in our field right now. And we've got a potential job growth of about 64,000 jobs over a 10-year period. Okay. Y'all don't really care exactly how many, as long as there's one really good job out there for you, or maybe one for next year and one for in a couple of years from now. I want to note on these quick facts kinds of things that the median pay for social workers is something that I want you to be very cautious of when you're looking at statistics in our field, mainly because as a profession, we begin our profession at the bachelor's level. Not everyone, but when we think about where the data begins, it begins with bachelor's level people and goes through master's level, PhD folks, all of that. And in most salary statistics, we are all lumped together. So I often have clinicians call me and are like, is this for real? Is my average salary only going to be $50,000? Absolutely not. I want you to look at some other statistics, because this is average for our entire field, okay? There's the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits puts out a good salary, I think they call it salary and job something, but a book on salary rates in our state. So if you're specifically looking at salary rates for different types of roles in Minnesota, that Minnesota Council of Nonprofits resource can be really helpful. Otherwise, there's tons of data online. I just want to make sure that you're really critically looking at that and filtering out the types of roles in particular that you're looking for. All right, so let's dive into getting you that dream job. Okay. I want to start here, and some of you might think this is really funny. I don't know if you watch Last Week Tonight with John Oliver ever, but dude's hilarious, I think. But as we talk about cover letters and resumes, I want to first acknowledge that the job search world is absolutely changing, and is changing really rapidly, and we in our field have to keep up with it, okay? If you want to be at the table in this job search process, I need you to keep up with what's happening. All right. So in an episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, it was aired on February 26th. It was focused on artificial intelligence, and he covered an article from The Guardian from May 12th, 2022. And he said, this is Oliver says, large companies often use AI-powered tools to sift through resumes and rank them. In fact, the CEO of ZipRecruiter estimates that at least 3/4 of all resumes submitted for jobs in the US are read by algorithms. For which is the ZipRecruiter, the ZipRecruiter CEO, he has some really helpful advice. He said, when people tell you that you should dress up your accomplishments or you should use non-standard resume templates to make your resume stand out when it's in a pile of resumes, he says that's awful advice. The only job your resume has is to be comprehensible to the software or the robot that is reading it, because that software or robot is going to decide whether or not a human ever gets eyes on it. All right, so that is the CEO of ZipRecruiter. This is a huge shift in the advice that has been given to social workers for decades, but more and more of us are applying through online portals for positions at both small and large organizations. So we really need to take this to heart. And the words that you use in your resume and your cover letter matter more than ever in the job search process. So I cannot stress enough for you that if you haven't updated your stuff in a while and you haven't thought about some of this, haven't looked at the words and the algorithms and those sorts of things, it is time for you to take a fresh look at that. And that's what we're going to spend a chunk of our time on in today's session. I'll start us off with this set of 15 qualities that employers look for in a candidate. Okay. Now, this is regardless of career track. So I want you all to take a peek at this. Think about how many of these can you maybe check off for yourself? Which ones do you want to improve on? Think about some of the qualities that are listed here that you have on your resume or in your cover letter. It might be something as you go through and you think about, okay, these are the ones that fit for me. Then take a peek back at your resume and see if these words show up somewhere in there, okay? We're going to go over a bunch more words today, but I first want to cover a couple of other important things. So this one is, what are your qualities? And again, you have to be able to name them. What are the qualities that stand you apart from others? The other is, what are you most proud of in your career? Think about what sets you apart from others. What have you accomplished? What are skills that you've developed over time? What are you great at? Make sure that you get those things on your resume or your cover letter, that you really have to share this information somehow in some way with that prospective employer. So I want you to really step back before you look at your materials, step back and think, okay, what are the things I'm especially good at? What am I really proud of accomplishing? What are my skills that I bring to the table before you look at your resume and cover letter? Because I promise you, you're missing some things along the way. All right, let's dive into some best practices for resumes, and we're going to come back to some more words. All right, this might sound really obvious, but you'd be surprised by the number of people who automatically apply to a position that really is not a good fit, and they don't realize it until later because they didn't do any research. Okay, I even hear from employers often who have people stand them up for interviews, which is not great. Right? You got tagged, you got flagged, you got an interview, and then you no-showed because you did a little research before the interview and realized that's actually not a good fit for me. I need you to do that before you submit your resume so you know that you're serious about it. Organizations absolutely track that stuff. Like they know people's names and who's come through. But it's really it's important to tailor your resume to each job, including social work internships, both for undergrads and graduate students. And one way to do this is to study that potential employer's website and their social media accounts. Determine what licenses or certifications or other requirements they have for that particular position. And that research really helps you understand if a position's a good fit for you too. And, am I someone that they might potentially hire at all? After you complete that research, create an outline by making some lists to organize your education, your skills, particularly your tech and computer kinds of skills, because they are so important in our field as well. Your social work experience, your memberships, your trainings, include licenses and degrees, social work internships and volunteer work. That people leave those off often. And I'll be in an interview with someone and they'll say, well, when I worked at such and so, I, gave me an example from a place, and I'll say, I don't see that employer listed on your resume. Oh, that was an internship. Okay, that is absolutely, even if it's unpaid, that is unpaid employment experience, and you should absolutely have that on your resume. I still have my bachelor's and master's level internships way more than 20 plus years later on my CV, because they're actually in areas of practice that I haven't worked in other than that. But the fact that I spent a year working in domestic violence and a year working in a prison absolutely helps make me a well-rounded sort of social worker. So make sure you don't exclude things. Also, your terminology and action verbs and keywords that you incorporate into your resume should be things that mimic what comes out of your search related to that organization. What are the kinds of words they use? When you look at their strategic plan, when you look at their mission and vision and goals and values, how can you mimic those things in your material so that you show that you align with them also? And many of us don't highlight our weaknesses on our resumes and cover letters, but we don't do enough to highlight our strengths. So that's why I started before on like, you have to be able to name your strengths and be your own best advocate here. I know that this is hard for many of you, but you have to, in the job search process, you have to sell yourself. Okay. No one knows you potentially in these spaces. And so if you don't tell them what you've done and what you know and what you're capable of, they don't make them have to assume. Okay. I was actually in an interview recently and I felt like I was coaching the person in what to say. They were selling themselves really short. I asked them what skills they had in invoicing and payment tracking, as that was part of the role I was looking for. And they said they didn't really have that. But I knew from their resume that they had run their own business. So of course I assumed that they had done that. So I nudged them and was like, it looks to me like you in running your own business, it seems like you would have to be doing your own invoicing and billing and financial tracking and things. And this person was like, oh yeah, but it wasn't for an employer. So they were backing off of, using this as an example because they were like, I didn't get paid for that sort of thing. I wasn't employed by an organization doing that. And it doesn't matter. Remember, everything counts. Your internships, your volunteer work, your personal life. It doesn't matter where you got those skills, just that you have them. Another thing to just pay attention to is that a sloppy sort of looking resume will absolutely detract from your accomplishments and your skills. Okay, so your final resume should be attractive and readable and nicely organized. And you should pay really close attention to grammar and spelling and always proofread your writing. A well-formatted resume is organized with headers and bold fonts in certain places and bullets, and should be really nicely outlined and clear to read. This is the one document that I would absolutely urge every one of you to have an editor look at. And that could be someone you pay to be an editor, but it could also be someone in your life who has really solid editing skills, who can give you some really quality feedback and a different eye on it. Sometimes we look at our own stuff so much that we can't see it anymore. So have someone with maybe a clearer vision take a peek at it for you. Social work resumes generally use Arial, Times, or Helvetica 11-point font. Okay, Times is kind of out now. It's not APA any longer, but you can argue that. But pick one that looks nice, is very easy and clear to read, and make sure it's large enough font that someone can actually read it. Some sources still say that a resume should be one page unless you're applying for a fancy kind of position, in which cases some of the research I was looking at said 2 pages are acceptable. And I would say that it depends on how long your career has been, period. There are no rules that you have to get your resume onto 1 page. If you're a new grad, I think 1 page is probably plenty for the couple of jobs that you've had that align with the field, internships, degree, that sort of thing. But if you've been around for a while, it might be several pages, and that is fine. I would urge you to not drop stuff off just to make it shorter. But you could shorten the descriptions under positions that are older. So instead of having, 10 bullets under a position that was 15 years ago, you might summarize that into some shorter bullets that combine some categories together. These are the big buckets of things that I did in that role. And then leave the more depth of the roles to the couple of things that you've done more recently. But don't drop employment experiences off completely to make it shorter. And it also looks like you've been in the employment world a shorter period of time. And some of us need to prove like, I've been around for a minute and I have some real experience to share also. Most sources still say to generally List your education and training information first, followed by your experiences. So followed by the jobs that you've had. That's still sort of best practice. All right. Let's switch gears here. And I want to talk a little bit about cover letters, and then we're going to talk more about what's in each of them, because some of the things we're going to talk about is in them. You might put in one or the other. So we're going to talk about your cover letter first. So on this slide, you see just a general format to follow when writing a cover letter. And I want to say once again, it is a letter, folks. Write it as a letter. This is not an email. It is not a social media post. And so many of you, I think, are getting away from traditional letter writing and don't remember how to format a letter, like whose address goes at the top, and then you put a date, and then you write the dear whom. And I literally just finished hiring 2 positions, and I cannot tell you how many of the cover letters were like they were writing me an email. And it specifically says a cover letter, and you're uploading it somewhere. So make sure you use some formal organization to it. Even if you're sending it via email, send it as an attachment so that when they print it off, they actually have the cover letter in their hand if they decide to do that. Okay. There are tons of letter writing templates out there. Just you can open up Word, you can open up Google Docs and ask for a letter template, formal letter template, and just use that. Okay. Now, according to Indeed in 2023, while cover letters are not always required, many hiring managers still rely on them to gauge an applicant's skills and experience and background. And I would say that I absolutely use the cover letter for those reasons. As I said, I've recently hired for these 2 positions, and for both of them, I opened the cover letter first to get a sense of the candidate's writing skill, why they wanted the job, and what skills and experiences they highlighted. Like, what did they tell me they've done that aligns with this? So I get a sense like, oh, this person has worked in these kinds of places. Here's why they want the job. I want to also get a sense of their personality a little bit and really gauge their actual interest in this particular job. Okay. I did not interview anyone that didn't submit a cover letter, period. I had so many applicants, I didn't have to. And the job posting specifically said to submit a cover letter and resume. So if you didn't take the time to write me a cover letter and summarize for me why you want this job and why you think you're a good fit for it, I don't have time. I know that might seem harsh, but on paper, if you look at across people's resumes, people sort of look the same in a lot of ways, right? You've had a couple social work jobs, maybe some managerial experience. 80% of our social workers in Minnesota have a master's degree. So there's, it's harder to sort of tell people apart. So it's nice if they share with you some of what they're thinking. I also would say, if it was clear that they used a really generic cover letter or one that they had written for something else, which, mind you, some people actually had a different title for a different position in the cover letter that they submitted. So they clearly didn't put any time into applying for this particular job, right? Like, you're off my list. Nope. So it's really hard to take people seriously, right, if they don't take the process seriously too. I think that the key to writing a really effective cover letter is to clearly show how your professional experience fits with the needs of the open role and the culture of that hiring agency, okay? You also want to be sure that you answer any questions up front that you think the organization might want to know or maybe should know. For example, if your address is in Minnesota, so your mailing address is in Minnesota, but you're moving to Florida in a couple of months and you're applying to positions in Florida, you should tell them that. Otherwise, they might not think twice about interviewing you. I can tell you how many applicants I've received from other states for in-person positions, and they never said to me they intended to move to Minnesota. So I'm left wondering, like, why are you applying for this job and you live in Georgia? You realize it's an in-person. So so often when someone has felt like a really good fit and I've taken the time to reach out to them, I'll ask that question or have the recruiter ask that question from our HR office, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm moving to Minnesota next month, or whatever it is. Great, you should tell someone that. Okay. But in the letter, have a nice outline to it and talk a bit about, so who are you? Why do you want this particular job? What makes you a good fit? And answer some of those questions up front. Okay. This is your opportunity to tell a little bit of a story, build a little relationship with the employer. So let's get back to some of those words, folks, words to include on your resume. Here are some good action words. Sometimes we get really stuck in a rut and we use the same boring words in our resumes over and over again. So I encourage you to try plugging in some different ones along the way. So every sentence doesn't start with helped create, helped do this, helped whatever. That's one of those kind of, not very strong words, but there are lots of others that you could use. So switch up just some of the language on there. Here are a few that I want you to avoid, okay? There are some controversial words to avoid on your resume, and I encourage you to do a little quick word search on your cover letter and your resume and see if you find any of these. Some of them are just buzzwords kinds of things, but they don't make you necessarily sound smarter, okay? You're trying to be a little kitschy, a little buzzwordy, that kind of thing. So get those out of there, all right? Sometimes learning what to do also includes what not to do. So I want to talk through, and this is a pretty long list. It goes over 2 slides. And we're going to talk about some critical resume mistakes. So things not to do. Okay, so this is from Career Blog, and there's some really good stuff in here. So one is including irrelevant experiences. So if you're now in the social work world and you're a new grad, but your job prior to being in social work was at a coffee shop, for example, you may want to just leave it off, okay? It depends on the role, but if it's, what I tell folks is like loosely aligned with social work practice. So if you were a food service person in a nursing home while you were in college and you specifically want to work with the elderly population, I would include that on your resume, right? So you get the difference. If it's something that feels like it makes you more qualified or gets you in front of a crowd of people that you want to be working with later, then that could be helpful to you. Make sure you back up your claims with some data. If you say you grew the grant income of your organization immensely, like what does that mean? What is immensely? Is it, did you earn $10,000 in grants? Did you bring in $100,000 or $1 million in grants? Those are big differences, right? So use some data if it's available in things like large caseload, small caseload, those kinds of things. That doesn't mean anything to anyone. So use actual data whenever possible. Use a resume builder. If at all possible, there's lots of tools out there to help you, including fluff skills or obvious skills. So things when I read through resumes and people are like, I'm a people person, I'm a hard worker, like you better be. You're a social worker, you want this job. Like that does not set you apart from other people. So you need to really hone in on some things that set you apart. Using an infographic resume, it might seem really cool, folks. It does not do well in the resume readers, and often in our field in particular, people will get turned off by that. Now, if you were looking for a different kind of job, so for example, I hired a communications consultant recently, and part of the reason I hired this particular person is because on their resume, it had their website, and I went to their website and looked at it and was like, that's absolutely who I want. They have great visuals. They have a great sense of how to communicate. Like I like the way they write about things, even when they're just talking about themselves or the kind of work they want to do. And it's organized well, thoughtfully. I was like, yep, that's my person. Done. Before then I met them and I was like, yeah, absolutely. But I knew because of what they shared with me in terms of something that I could tangibly see. So instead of using responsibilities, this is what I did, or this is what was in my job description. I want you to talk more about your achievements. What did you accomplish? What were your particular contributions to the team? Not tailoring your resume. So make sure that you're tailoring your resume, as I said, to that particular role that you're looking for or the particular field. Okay, there are lots of things maybe you did in sort of another life before you came into social work. And now you can use those, right? So if you worked in communications before you came into social work, those skills absolutely can be helpful in this area. Even if you're in direct practice, that sort of thing, but it's how you communicate those. So you might just say it differently in a resume that's about social work. Make sure your formatting is really good. Make sure that you save the resume in a good format, i.e. make it a PDF, people. Just save it as a PDF. That way people can't edit it. That way when they open it, no matter what version of whatever Word or Excel or tool or whatever they open it with, it's nice and easy to read, that sort of thing. Okay. Picking the wrong template. Folks, make sure your template, so if you're using like a resume builder, pick a template that looks really nice, but then also make sure that you're including the right version of your resume. So how will you name it, whether it's dated, whether it's for a particular role, that sort of thing. Just make sure that you're attaching the correct one. Including a photo. Don't include a photo, people. Don't do it, period. It's weird. It's awkward. People can Google you. I Google people all the time. Like, man, that person sounds familiar. I just Google them quick, check their LinkedIn, look at their face. Yeah, I know them. You do not need to put it on your resume. People can find your picture. Choosing, as I said, the wrong file name. Name your resume something good. Not, I don't know. If your resume is in progress and you name it resume in progress, suddenly I'm like, is this their real resume or did they send me a draft form? Right? So make sure that you name your thing something that's respectable and that sort of thing. Or if, you use a cute name for yourself or something like that, just make sure it's very clear and professional what it is. Make sure it's free of spelling errors and typos and grammar issues and those sorts of things. Also, be sure to mention employment gaps in your resume. Sometimes that includes like putting years in there and what you were doing during that time, even if it was, and I shouldn't say even if it's volunteer work, if it's travel, if you took a year off and traveled the country, my guess is you learned some things in that time. I want you to write in there, like took a sabbatical for 1 year, traveled the country, maybe put some notes in there about places you went, things you did, those sorts of things. People are like, wow, well-rounded, that's cool. Stay home with your kids. During COVID, lots of people left their positions, stayed home with kids, that sort of thing. So you put some creative words in there about what kind of elementary temporary teacher you were and that sort of thing. And it's great. Don't leave gaps for people to have to guess that, oh, it was COVID, maybe they had kids. Put it on there, okay? Not pointing out a career change. So if there's a significant shift in your career, make sure you point that out. It doesn't necessarily have to be on your resume, but maybe it's on your cover letter saying, as you'll see in my resume, I worked for 10 years in this industry, then I went back to school, and now I've been building my career in this other realm. Just name it so it's really clear that you made a purposeful transition in there. Making the resume too long. So yes, tighten it up. Limit your words, especially for things, as I said, that are older or not including enough information. I still get resumes. People sit down and I'm like, why is this only one page? You've been in the field like 20 years. Well, I was trying to get it on one page. Okay, no. That's a misunderstood rule. I need some more information. What did you do in each of these jobs? What were your responsibilities? So make sure you don't limit yourself too much. Typos in the contact information session. Okay, make sure they can get a hold of you, or using an unprofessional email address. Folks, this is not hard in the current world. Give yourself a new Gmail address. Mine is karen.goodenough@gmail.com, period. That's it. Okay, no fluffy stuff, no pet names for yourself, no funny business. I avoid years whenever possible. When you put a 1952 on there, it makes it look like you were born in 1952. We know that ageism is a thing. So I want you to just be thoughtful, okay? Same with like 1980 or maybe not 80 anymore, maybe 2020. I'm looking at it like, okay, so is this person 23? Really? Like, or was it from, an email address you've had since 23? Just don't use years in there, people. Name it something just really generic, very professional, simple, okay? Don't lie. And make sure that you're optimizing your resume as we're talking about today for those tracking systems or reading robots, those sorts of things. So some of that is formatting and some of it is the words that you're using throughout. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about how you apply. Does it really matter whether you apply online or through LinkedIn, snail mail, email, walk-in, particularly if a position says you could apply any which way? Anyone have thoughts? You think there's a preference out there in the world? No? Okay. So you're right. So according to, okay, one person says online, according to muse.com 2020, overall, where you apply is irrelevant and says little about you as a candidate. And often hiring managers have no idea where your resume came from. So as long as it ends up in their system, they don't really care how it got there. Um, but rather, an HR department might use information about where people are applying to identify where they should be investing their time and their budget in the future. So sometimes they'll say in their portals, like, how did you hear about this position? So they're doing that to learn some things for their own, investment in where they put their positions in the future. But if, for example, they find a majority of their candidates through LinkedIn or a higher percentage of their really quality hires come through a particular job board rather than their own careers page, they might direct more of their recruiting efforts to those places. So I think doing what's most convenient for you from whatever the options are that are offered by the organization, that is fine. What I wouldn't do is apply any way that they didn't list. Okay, so if I specifically say, apply through this career portal, and there's a link there, don't email me your resume and cover letter. Please don't do that. But if it says to email it, right, don't drop it off at their office. Okay, I think that matters more. I also want you to note that hiring staff and HR staff can often see all of your application history through their portal. Okay, so we have a hiring portal, and in there, it tells me how many other positions a person has applied to within my organization. So I want you to be cautious about just applying for everything that comes open in an organization. Be particular about what it is you actually have the skills for. This came up for me more recently because I'd posted a handful of positions, and they're all really different from each other. And I had a couple people who applied for every one of them. And I'm like, now I don't really know why, which one you're actually skilled in. Okay. And when we think about counties or the state or other places like that, they absolutely can see your application history. So be cautious about what you apply for, but also that if you're really serious about working for a particular organization and you don't care exactly how you get in or which role you get at the beginning, ask for an informational interview with their HR people or a hiring manager or a particular department and get a sense of where you might fit and become kind of a known entity to them, so that when they do see your name on their list of potential applicants for a role, they're like, oh yeah, I remember that person. They came in and met with me, or we had a really nice phone conversation. Okay, make yourself that known entity. All right, so the NASW Career Center has a bunch of, and we're moving into some resource stuff here, has some great resources for social workers. You can click this blue link. It's a link on socialworkers.org, our career center, and it takes you to a website. You do have to be a member to gain access to this one. So, and all of you in here today are NASW members. Maybe if you're watching the recording, you're not, but we would encourage you to join NASW and you'd get all kinds of access to these career resources. Lots of valuable stuff in here. There's a job link resource. So that's positions that are open across the country that people are putting out to social workers through our job link resource. There's also a job board on NASW Minnesota's website, and those are of local positions across Minnesota. Those are open to anyone to take a peek at, not just members also. There's also sample resumes and cover letters, some interviewing tips, some information on social work salaries and some videos, all sorts of things that you can check out. There's also all kinds of samples out in the world. Beamjobs.com allows you to build your resume using hundreds of sample templates that they have online, and you can save it and download it. You can return another time to the site. It's free. It's a pretty cool resource. You can also click on each of the other links on this slide, and note, folks who are here today, I will go ahead and send you a copy of the slides along with your CEU so you can get these as well. But there are all kinds of resources out there to help you look at samples for cover letters, thank you notes, acceptance letters, those sorts of things. Indeed.com is one of those resources that has all sorts of things on it, and YouTube also has tons of resources. So do a little research, ensure that you're up to speed. And I would say too that those thank you letters, there's some interesting info in here about how to send a thank you letter after an interview, that sort of thing. What I would say is, in our electronic world, doing a thank you letter electronically, not 5 minutes after the interview. Okay, give yourself a little time to sit with it, even if it's later that day after you've interviewed or the next morning right away. You want to get in front of that person again, and you want to make it clear if this is a role that you're really interested in an organization you are really interested in, I want you to tell them that. Because sometimes I get a vibe from someone that I'm like, I don't know that they were super excited about this position. And the next morning, they send me a note and are like, I just want to thank you for interviewing me. And I really appreciated XYZ about what you said. And here's why I think I'd be great on your team. And I hope you'll consider me for this position. I might be like, okay, maybe I read that wrong. That person might end up with a second interview or maybe a follow-up call. Okay, so make sure that you're not leaving it sort of to assumption. If you're really serious about it, let them know that. So the thank you shouldn't be and actually it doesn't help you if you just do a generic, like, thanks so much for the interview and for taking the time to talk to me. I just got one of those for the position I was interviewing for, and I was like, what? Why'd they even send that? Thank you for the time. Okay, you're welcome. Like, I was left wondering, like, are they actually interested, or they were just being a nice person, right? So make sure that you use that opportunity to make it clear if you are interested in that role. And then also, if you missed talking about something in particular, that might be another opportunity to share something that, when you drive away or you get off the Zoom call, all of a sudden it comes to you like, oh, I should have given that example. I completely forgot to tell them that I did this other really interesting thing. That is a great place in your thank you note to follow up and say, hey, I just, after I left, I was reminded that I should have talked about this experience. And I think it's another way to highlight a particular skill that you were looking for, right? So use those opportunities to come back around to focus on things that maybe you missed saying. All right, at the end of your slides here is a set of references, and then I've got my contact information. I want to give us a few minutes to answer some questions. So let me just walk through this real quick. We are at NASW Minnesota. We're looking for some board members. So if you are interested in a leadership position, maybe you're looking to grow your resume and grow your leadership experience, your administrative experience, those sorts of things, being on a nonprofit board or association board is a great way to do that. You can also follow us on social media and check out our job board on our website, as I said, for current openings across the state and the country. And I would also say that in Minnesota, if you're job searching Minnesota, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits job board is still a great place to search for social work related jobs in our state. So with that, I want to give our audience a few minutes to ask questions or to weigh in something I missed. Maybe you've been job searching recently and you had some aha moment or an experience that you learned something from that you feel like folks in the room could benefit from. So if you want to drop your thoughts in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question, that would be awesome too, or chime in.
Hi, Karen. This is Kelly. I did have a question. I'm wondering about if there's any impact with regards to like social media or having a LinkedIn profile and like appearing to be more visible through those resources, or if employers aren't necessarily looking at that as a requirement?
Kelly, that's a great question. People are absolutely looking at them. So you definitely need to, and we weren't talking as much in here about your social media presence and that sort of thing, but it absolutely affects the job search process. I would encourage you, someone else, does it make a difference to add your LinkedIn profile to your resume? You absolutely can, particularly if you use it really well. If your LinkedIn profile is really solid, if you have lots of people who've actually commented, given you whatever they're called, little, references, talked about things that you're great at, that sort of thing. If you're using it actively, absolutely you can use it. Particularly, some organizations might be looking for that if social media is any part of the role also. I also think that if you don't use it a ton, that's okay too. But you just have to know that there's all kinds of data out there that says that job searching through LinkedIn is sort of the way to do job search now, that you can submit resumes, you can search for roles. I see positions that people are posting all of the time in their organizations through LinkedIn. So if you're on the hunt, it absolutely is another way to get yourself up to speed and represented out in the world. Whether or not it's going to be the thing that gets you the particular job, it's hard to tell, but it absolutely doesn't hurt. On the other side of that, you were asking about other social media, and I think it's a good moment to tighten up your controls on your social media, to check your social media pages. This is not an ethics training, but in my ethics trainings, I talk about, should you Google your clients? Should you Google the people that are applying for jobs with you? Those sorts of things. And it does not say in the code of ethics that you cannot Google people, but it does say that you should use social media for basically for good and only search for people if you absolutely need to. And so I say that on one hand, and I also say, I know the realities of the world, which is, I know a lot of people who Google everyone. It's the first thing you're going to do. So I see you, Kelly, as an applicant, and I Google you and see what shows up. And I can see your Facebook page, and here's a bunch of personal things about you, whether or not it's ethical and the right thing to do, and maybe that organization's HR department would support it or not. The reality is, if it's out there, it's public information. So tighten up your social media profiles, make sure that you have, things locked down so only your friends can see things. Also be really, thoughtful about what you're putting out into the world also. Another person asked, do you have thoughts on resumes for federal positions? I know their resumes are different. Do you have any thoughts on that, Elizabeth, from experience that you've had? What makes those federal positions different in terms of their application process?
I don't. I've just looked at the process of applying for
Yeah.
USA.jobs.com or whatever.
Sure.
And it says you need a federal resume specifically. And I just know that it is different, but I'm not sure in exact
Follow
ways.
the rules. Yeah, I can't tell you exactly. I've never applied for them myself. What I can say is so many of the very big systems, so that includes even DHS in Minnesota and other university systems in particular, they have really complicated sometimes processes where you have to kind of get into their portal and get approved in their portal before you can actually apply for a job. And so that is a process you might want to think about. If those are jobs that you're looking for generally kind of in the big picture, apply through those systems early so that you have the access already. You have a username and password, you already have your materials in their system. So when a position comes up, you can easily apply for it. Many of those systems now, you don't even upload things to them, but you put your content into them. And so you take your content from your resume, and I use a Word document version of it and copy content and paste it out of there. So you get all of the pieces from your resume built into it, but it's kind of like you have to rebuild your resume in their little system. So Yeah, follow their rules if you want to be counted. The other trick on some of those is making sure that you're really thoughtful about the answers to all of the little short and long answer questions that they pose to you, because sometimes they'll do screening questions and you will screen yourself out by not being thorough, by not answering something, by selling yourself short, not taking the time necessary to really fully answer that question. Again, the semantics matter. So that's where having kind of tight descriptions of your experiences and skills with really solid words and things ready to go. So when you drop your content into those systems, the same thing's going to happen in their little search algorithms, okay? Just a note too that the numbers of years matter. So in some of those search algorithms, they'll say things like you must have 2 to 5 years experience in X, okay? So make sure in your resume that you use numbers on things, that you don't just make people do the math, right? 5 years experience in managing a team, 10 years experience in grant writing. Put those absolutely, if those are criteria that are listed in the job description, put them just like that in your resume, right? Or a larger number if it's more, but make sure you use an actual, because they're looking for a very specific number. Don't make them use the math, do the math, and make sure their little algorithm can call you in. Any other questions, thoughts from people? Great questions. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you for spending an hour with me today. I will send out the slides and the CEU to everyone. If you're watching this virtually on YouTube after the fact, you can count this hour as an independent study CEU. And if you have questions about how to do that, you can reach out to me. And folks, good luck with your job search process. It is a process, right? It's a big job just to be looking for a job, but also if you do as we're talking about and be prepared out in the world, maybe it doesn't feel like so much of a job when the right thing comes along also. So I encourage you to put your good vibes out into the world, let people know what you're thinking about, start talking to folks, do those informational interviews, watch that other session that we did on YouTube on negotiating, make sure that you get what you are worth in terms of both your pay, your benefits, all of that sort of thing. And I wish you all the best in your search, folks. Take good care.